In the chaotic world of the Level 1 Trauma Center at St. Jude's Memorial, silence is often mistaken for weakness, and age is mistaken for incompetence. For 3 years, the staff mocked Abigail Ross. They laughed at her slight limp. They rolled their eyes at her silence. The young residents, fresh out of medical school with egos bigger than their paychecks, treated her like the furniture, useful, but beneath notice. They didn't know that the hands-changing bedpans today had once held the lives of entire platoons together under mortar fire. They didn't know her limp was a medal of honor carved into her very bone. They thought she was just a tired old woman. They were wrong, and it took a dying colonel and a room full of stunned generals to teach them the most important lesson of their lives. You never judge a warrior by the uniform they wear in peacetime. The fluorescent lights of the St. Jude's emergency room hummed with a low, headache-inducing buzz, a sound Abigail Ross had long since learned to tune out. At 54, Abby moved with a deliberate, rhythmic pace that the younger nurses often mistook for slowness. She didn't rush. She didn't sprint down the hallways with a stethoscope flying around her neck like a superhero's cape. She moved with economy. Every step was calculated. Every motion had a purpose. But to Dr. Caleb Sterling, the new chief resident, she was just an obstacle. "Ross, for God's sake, move it!" Sterling barked, snapping his fingers in her direction. He was standing by Trauma Bay 2, holding a clipboard like a weapon. He was 32, brilliant, handsome in a catalogue model sort of way, and entirely insufferable. "I asked for the saline drip 3 minutes ago. My patient is dehydrating while you're taking a scenic stroll." Abby didn't flinch. She didn't look up from the cart she was organizing, her hands moving deftly to arrange the vials. "The saline is already hung, doctor," she said, her voice raspy, low, and calm. "I did it before you asked. Check the line." Sterling blinked, spinning around to look at the patient, a young man with a mild concussion from a frat party gone wrong. Sure enough, the bag was there, the drip steady. Sterling's face flushed a deep crimson, not from embarrassment, but from the anger of being corrected. He hated being corrected, especially by her. She was a relic, an LPN in a world of specialized RNs and nurse practitioners. She wore scrubs that were always clean, but slightly faded, and she had that limp, a stiff, hitching gait in her left leg that slowed the flow of traffic in his ER. "Don't get smart with me, Ross," Sterling sneered, lowering his voice so the patient wouldn't hear. But the other nurses certainly did. "Just because you manage to anticipate one order doesn't make you competent. You're clogging up my floor. Why don't you go change the bedpans in geriatrics? That seems more your speed." A ripple of snickers went through the nursing station. Jessica and Chloe, 2 fresh graduates who idolized Sterling, covered their mouths to hide their giggles. They called Abby the tortoise behind her back. Abby finally looked up. Her eyes were grey, the colour of a storm cloud that had already rained itself out. There was no anger in them, only a deep, weary patience. "I'm assigned to trauma, doctor. Unless the charge nurse moves me, I stay." "We'll see about that," Sterling muttered, brushing past her and deliberately bumping her shoulder. Abby took the impact without swaying. She was solid, built like someone who had carried heavy loads for a long time. She watched him walk away, her hand instinctively going to her left hip, rubbing the scar tissue through the fabric of her scrubs. "Don't let him get to you, Abby," whispered Martha, the head charge nurse, as she walked by with a stack of files. Martha was the only one who treated Abby with decency, though even she didn't know the full story. "He's just stressed. The board is reviewing his tenure next month." "Stress is no excuse for lack of discipline," Abby said quietly. Martha chuckled, shaking her head. "You always sound like my grandfather. Discipline. Look, just keep your head down. I tried to get you off Sterling's rotation, but he specifically requested you. I think he likes having someone to kick around." "I've been kicked by worse men than Caleb Sterling," Abby murmured, turning back to her cart. The night shift dragged on. It was a Friday, which meant the usual parade of chaos. bar fights, car accidents, and overdoses. Through it all, Abby was a ghost. She was everywhere and nowhere. While the other nurses panicked over a sudden drop in blood pressure, Abby was already pushing the crash cart into position before the alarm even sounded. When a drunk patient took a swing at a security guard, Abby didn't scream. She simply sidestepped, grabbed the patient's wrist in a pressure lock that looked effortless, and guided him back onto the gurney. "Whoa," Jessica said, blinking as she watched Abby secure the restraints. "Where did you learn that?" "Self-defense class at the Y," Abby lied smoothly. She checked the restraints. Tight, but not cutting circulation. Professional. Jessica rolled her eyes, losing interest immediately. "Right, the Y. Anyway, did you hear? We have a VIP incoming. Code Black protocol." Abby froze. Code Black meant high-level government or military. "Who is it?" "Some military guy. Colonel something. Apparently he collapsed at a gala downtown. Heart failure, possible stroke. They're diverting him here because we have the best cardiac unit in the state." Jessica checked her reflection in the glass cabinet. "I hope he's handsome. Or at least rich." Abby felt a cold prickle at the base of her neck. A colonel. She hadn't been around brass in 10 years. Not since the hearing. Not since she walked away from the life that had consumed her for 2 decades. "Dr. Sterling is freaking out," Chloe chimed in, joining them. "He wants everything perfect. He's yelling at everyone. He told me if I mess up the IV, he'll have my license." "He's insecure," Abby said. "He needs to focus on the medicine, not the rank." "Easy for you to say," Chloe snapped. "You're just an LPN. You don't have a career to lose. If Sterling messes this up, he's done. If he saves a war hero, he's golden." "A war hero," Abby repeated, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Let's hope he survives long enough to be saved." The radio at the nursing station crackled to life. "ETA 2 minutes. Male, 60s, unstable, vitals crashing, BP 70/40, pulse thready. Get ready, people." 2 minutes, Sterling screamed, bursting out of the break room. "I want trauma, 1 clear. Ross, get out of there. I want competent nurses only. Jessica, Chloe, you're with me. Ross, go manage the waiting room. Keep the riffraff away from the VIP area." It was a demotion in the middle of a crisis. Managing the waiting room was the lowest job in the ER. Abby looked at Sterling. She saw the sweat beading on his forehead. He was terrified. He was going to fumble this. She knew the look of a man who was out of his depth. "Doctor," Abby said, her voice firm. "You might need an extra pair of hands for the airway. His vitals suggest—" "I said get out!" Sterling roared, pointing at the double doors. "Go sit at the desk and check insurance cards. That is a direct order." The entire ER went silent. Patients looked over. Other doctors averted their eyes. Abby held his gaze for a second longer than was comfortable. Then she nodded once. "Understood, doctor." She turned and walked toward the waiting room, her limp slightly more pronounced as fatigue set in. She could feel the eyes of the staff on her back, pitying, mocking. The quiet nurse, the old nurse, the one who cleans up the mess. But as she pushed through the swing doors, the sirens wailed outside, louder and closer. The ambulance screeched into the bay. Abby paused by the glass, looking out into the rain-slicked night. She watched the paramedics unload the stretcher. She saw the uniform first, dress blues, medals flashing under the ambulance lights, and then she saw the face. Abby's breath hitched. Her hand flew to her mouth. It wasn't just any colonel. It was Colonel Richard Iron Graves. And the last time she had seen him, he was holding her hand in a dust-choked medical tent in Kandahar, promising her that he would never forget what she did. The waiting room was a purgatory of coughing children, anxious spouses, and the smell of stale coffee. Abby sat behind the plexiglass, ostensibly checking in a young woman with a twisted ankle, but her mind was 50 feet away, in Trauma 1. She could hear the shouting. The walls of the ER were thin, and chaos has a way of penetrating soundproofing. "I can't get the tube in. His throat is swollen." That was Sterling. Panic was raising his voice an octave. O2 sats are dropping. 85%. 82. Jessica's voice trembling. Push EPI. Push it now. Abby's fingers drummed on the desk. She knew exactly what was happening. Anaphylactic reaction to a medication, likely combined with the cardiac event. Graves had a severe allergy to specific contrast dyes, something only his personal medical file would show, a file that likely hadn't arrived yet. She checked the triage computer. Nothing. They were flying blind. "Mom?" The girl with the twisted ankle asked. "Are you okay? You look intense." Abby stood up. "Excuse me for a moment." She couldn't stay here. Orders be damned. Sterling was going to kill him. Abby moved. The limp vanished. She entered the main ER floor not as the tired LPN, but as Major Abigail Ross, formerly of the 101st Airborne Combat Surgical Unit. She didn't run, she flowed. She burst into Trauma 1 just as the monitor began the flat, monotone wail of a flatline. "Beep! He's coding!" Jessica screamed. "We lost him!" Sterling was frozen, holding the intubation blade, his hands shaking violently. "Defib! Charge to 200!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Clear! Don't shock him!" Abby's voice cut through the noise like a whip crack. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Sterling spun around, wild-eyed. "Get the hell out of here, Ross! Security!" Abby ignored him. She stepped up to the table, shoving Chloe aside with a hip check that sent the younger nurse stumbling. She looked at the colonel's chest. No rise. His face was swelling rapidly. "It's not just a heart attack, you idiot. It's anaphylaxis closing his airway," Abby snapped. She didn't look at Sterling. She looked at the patient. "He's allergic to iodine. Did you use contrast for the scan?" We were prepping," Sterling stammered. "Give me the scalpel. 10 blade. Now." Abby held out her hand. "You can't cut. You're a nurse," Sterling shouted, trying to body block her. "I'll have you arrested. If you don't give me that blade, he dies in 30 seconds, Abby hissed, her face inches from Sterling's, "and I will make sure the autopsy report shows exactly why." Maybe it was the steel in her eyes. Maybe it was the fact that the patient was turning blue. Sterling hesitated. Abby didn't wait. She reached past him, grabbed the scalpel from the tray, and turned back to the colonel. "Cricoid pressure," she ordered Jessica. "What?" Jessica froze. "Press on his throat. Here." Abby grabbed Jessica's hand and slammed it onto the colonel's neck. "Hold it!" With a precision that made the room gasp, Abby made a vertical incision at the base of the throat. Blood welled up, but she didn't hesitate. She used the handle of the scalpel to separate the tissue, finding the trachea. "Tube," she demanded. Chloe, operating on instinct, handed her a pediatric tube. Abby slotted it in. She listened. A hiss of air. The chest rose. "Bag him," Abby said, stepping back, her hands bloody. "Now!" Jessica squeezed the ambu bag. The chest rose again. On the monitor, the flatline jagged into a chaotic but present rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. "Sinus rhythm returning," the respiratory tech whispered, staring at Abby in disbelief. "Sats are coming up. 90%. The room was dead silent. The only sound was the rhythmic whoosh of the bag and the beep of the monitor. Abby took a breath, wiping a spot of blood from her cheek with her shoulder. She looked at the colonel's face. He was alive. She turned to find Dr. Sterling staring at her, his face a mask of humiliation and rage. "You," Sterling whispered, his voice shaking. "You just performed an unauthorized surgical procedure. You assaulted a superior. I saved his life," Abby said calmly. "You're fired," Sterling screamed, finding his voice. Get out of my hospital. I will have your license revoked by morning. You are done, Ross. Done." Abby looked at him. She looked at the nurses who were staring at her like she was a monster. She looked at the colonel, stable now, breathing. "Fine," she said softly. "I'm done." She untied her mask, dropped it into the biohazard bin, and walked out of the trauma room. She didn't look back. She went to the locker room, took her purse, and walked out the back exit into the rain. She thought it was over. She thought she would go home, feed her cat, and figure out how to live on a pension she had barely touched. But the next morning, the hospital didn't call the police. They called the Pentagon, because when Colonel Iron Graves woke up in the ICU, the first thing he did wasn't to ask for water. He grabbed Dr. Sterling by the lapels of his white coat with a grip like a vice. "Where is she?" the colonel rasped, his voice damaged but terrifying. "Who, sir?" Sterling squeaked. "The Angel," Graves growled. "I saw her. I heard her voice. The Angel of Kandahar. Where is Major Ross?" The rain that had started the night Abigail Ross walked out of St. Jude's hadn't stopped by morning. It drummed against the window of her small one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs, a rhythmic accompaniment to the dread sitting heavy in her stomach. Abby sat at her kitchen table, staring at a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. On the table sat a small, battered wooden box. Inside were things she hadn't looked at in a decade: a silver star, a purple heart, and a photograph of a younger woman in desert fatigues standing next to a smiling, dusty Colonel Graves. She hadn't told anyone at St. Jude's about her past. In the civilian world, people didn't understand. They asked intrusive questions about how many people she'd killed, or looked at her with pity she didn't want. So she had buried Major Ross and became just Abby, the quiet LPN with the bad leg. The phone rang, shattering the silence. It was the hospital administration. "Miss Ross," the voice was icy. It was Mrs. Gable, the Director of Human Resources. "We need you to come in immediately. The board is convening an emergency review regarding the incident last night. Dr. Sterling has filed formal charges of gross negligence and assault." "I saved his life," Abby said, her voice tired. "That is not the version of events Dr. Sterling has provided," Gable replied sharply. "If you do not appear, we will proceed with revoking your license in absentia and will refer the matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution." Abby closed her eyes. It wasn't enough to fire her. Sterling wanted to destroy her. He wanted to make sure she could never work again, just to cover his own panic. "I'll be there in an hour," Abby said. Underscore, 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 underscore. Back at the hospital, the atmosphere was poisonous. Dr. Caleb Sterling was pacing the floor of the administrator's office, looking every bit the victim. He had spent the morning terrorizing the nursing staff. He had pulled Jessica and Chloe into the supply closet and made it very clear: if anyone asks, I ordered the cricothyrotomy. I guided her hand. She was hysterical, and I had to take control. "If you say otherwise, you'll be looking for jobs in rural clinics by Monday." Terrified for their own careers, the young nurses had nodded. Now Sterling stood before Mr. Henderson, the hospital administrator. "She's a liability, sir. She's old, she's slow, and last night she snapped. She pushed me, physically pushed me, and started hacking at a VIP patient's throat. It's a miracle Colonel Graves didn't bleed out on the table. I managed to stabilize the airway after she butchered the incision." Henderson, a man who cared more about lawsuits than medicine, rubbed his temples. "And the patient? How is he?" "He's in a medically induced coma in the ICU," Sterling lied smoothly. "Stable but critical. When he wakes up, we need to be able to tell him that the rogue nurse responsible for his disfigurement has been dealt with." "Fine," Henderson sighed. "We'll terminate her today. Quietly. Non-disclosure agreements all around." When Abby arrived, she walked the gauntlet. The ER was busy, and as she limped towards the administrative wing, the whispers followed her like smoke. "That's her. The one who attacked Dr. Sterling. Crazy old lady." She kept her chin up, her face a mask of stone. She wore her best suit, a navy blue blazer that was 10 years old, but pressed sharp. She didn't look like a disgraced nurse. She walked with a cadence that, if anyone had been paying attention, was pure military march time. She entered the boardroom. A long mahogany table stretched out before her. At the far end sat Henderson, Mrs. Gable, and Dr. Sterling, who was smirking slightly as he reviewed a file. "Sit down, Miss Ross," Henderson said, not bothering to look up. Abby remained standing. "I prefer to stand, sir." Sterling scoffed, still playing the martyr. "Look, let's make this quick. You performed an unauthorized surgery. You endangered a patient. You assaulted a superior officer, doctor." "I identified an anaphylactic crisis that the attending physician missed," Abby said, her voice clear and projecting to the back of the room. "I requested the attending perform a cricothyrotomy. He froze. The patient flatlined. I acted to preserve life, in accordance with the Hippocratic Oath, which supersedes hospital hierarchy, in a life-or-death event." "You're a liar." Sterling slammed his hand on the table. "You nearly killed him. I had to fix your mess." "Check the security cameras in Trauma 1, Abby challenged. "The cameras in Trauma 1 were malfunctioning last night," Henderson interjected smoothly. "Conveniently for you, Miss Ross, so we only have the witness statements." He slid a piece of paper across the table. "Dr. Sterling, Nurse Jessica Miller, and Nurse Chloe Evans all state that you were acting erratically and aggressively." Abby felt a cold knot in her chest. They had erased the footage. Or Sterling had. "The fix was in. We are terminating your employment immediately," Henderson continued. "Furthermore, we are reporting this to the State Board of Nursing. You will never practice again. If you sign this admission of guilt, we will agree not to press criminal assault charges. If you fight us, we will ruin you." Abby looked at the paper. It was a confession. It said she was incompetent. It said she was sorry. She looked at Sterling. He was smiling, a cruel, predatory smile. He had won. He had crushed the witness to his cowardice. Abby reached for the pen. She had no money for a lawyer. She had no family to support her. She was just an old woman against a multi-million-dollar institution. "Sign it," Sterling goaded. "Be a good girl and sign it." Abby's hand hovered over the paper. The tip of the pen touched the line. The pen never finished the first letter of her name. A low rumble began to vibrate through the floor of the boardroom. It wasn't thunder. It sounded like heavy machinery. Or engines. Then came the sound of slamming doors. Not the polite swish of the hospital's automatic sliders, but the heavy, synchronized thud of multiple vehicles pulling up to the main entrance directly below the boardroom window. "What is that noise?" Henderson asked, annoyed. Sterling walked to the window and looked down. His face went pale. "What the—" Below, 3 matte black SUVs had pulled up onto the sidewalk, blocking the main entrance. Flanking them were 2 military Humvees. Men in fatigues were spilling out. Not local police, not private security. These were military police, armed with carbines, moving with terrifying speed and precision. "Is there a terrorist threat?" Mrs. Gable squeaked. Before anyone could answer, the boardroom doors didn't just open. They were flung wide so hard that the handle punched a hole in the drywall. 2 soldiers in full tactical gear stepped in, sweeping the room with their eyes before taking positions on either side of the door. They didn't speak. They just stood there, statues of intimidation. Then a man walked in. He was wearing the dress greens of a 3-star general. He was an older man, with steel-grey hair cut high and tight, and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. It was General Marcus Clayton, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Behind him walked 2 aides and, trailing nervously, the hospital's chief of surgery. Sterling's mouth fell open. Henderson scrambled to his feet, knocking over his chair. "Good General! To what do we owe this honor? If this is about Colonel Graves, I assure you, Dr. Sterling here has—" General Clayton ignored Henderson entirely. He didn't even look at him. His eyes scanned the room, bypassing Sterling, bypassing the expensive artwork, until they landed on the woman standing at the end of the table in the navy blazer. The general stopped. The room went deathly silent. Sterling stepped forward, trying to regain control. "General, please, we are in the middle of a disciplinary hearing for a rogue employee. If you could give us a moment to remove her." "Shut your mouth," the general said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The command was absolute. Sterling snapped his mouth shut with an audible click. General Clayton walked the length of the long table. He stopped 3 feet from Abby. He looked her up and down, taking in the tired eyes, the slight slump of her shoulders, the pen in her hand. Then, slowly, deliberately, the general snapped his heels together. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. He raised his hand in a crisp, perfect salute. "Major Ross," the general said, his voice thick with emotion. Abby straightened. The fatigue seemed to fall off her. Her chin rose. She dropped the pen. She returned the salute, her form as perfect as the day she left the service. "General Clayton," she replied softly. "At ease, Major," Clayton said, dropping his hand. He stepped forward and, breaking protocol, grabbed Abby's hand in both of his. "My God, Abby, we thought you were dead. When the dust settled in Kandahar, the reports said you were MIA. We looked for you for 2 years." "I didn't want to be found, Marcus," Abby said, a sad smile touching her lips. "I left the service. I just wanted quiet." "Quiet?" The general laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You call saving iron graves quiet? The man woke up an hour ago. He couldn't speak, so he wrote on a notepad. 2 words. Major Ross. Then he tried to get out of bed to find you himself. We had to sedate him." Sterling made a noise like a dying kettle. "Major." "Ross?" The general turned slowly to face Sterling. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by the cold indifference of a predator looking at prey. "And who are you?" Clayton asked. I am Dr. Caleb Sterling, the chief resident. I treated the colonel. Is that so?" Clayton walked over to the table and picked up the confession paper Abby had nearly signed. He read it, his eyebrows rising. "Gross negligence? Assault? Unauthorized surgery?" She cut his throat," Sterling stammered, sweat pouring down his face. "Without permission." "I've read the preliminary medical report from your own ICU chief," Clayton said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. The incision was textbook, a modified field cricothyrotomy, the kind they teach in Special Forces medical training, the kind Major Ross performed 300 times in the sandbox while mortar shells were falling on her head. Clayton leaned into Sterling's face. The ICU chief said that if she had waited 10 more seconds for permission, Colonel Graves would be brain dead. She didn't assault a superior, son. She saved a national asset. Sterling looked to Henderson for help, but the administrator was cowering against the wall. "This woman," Clayton gestured to Abby, "is a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross. She is the only reason half of the 75th Ranger Regiment made it home in 09. And you?" Clayton looked at the confession paper, then ripped it in half. "You tried to fire her?" "I didn't know," Sterling cried. "She's just a nurse. She's an LPN. She limps." Abby spoke up then. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a sledgehammer. "I limp, Doctor. Sterling, because I took a piece of shrapnel in the femoral artery while dragging a soldier twice my size out of a burning Humvee. I didn't drop him, and I didn't drop the colonel last night." The general turned back to Abby. "Get your things, Major. We're leaving." "Leaving?" Abby asked. "Colonel Graves has requested transfer to Walter Reed," Clayton said. "He refuses to be treated in this facility. He says he doesn't trust the chain of command here." Clayton shot a glare at Henderson, and he requested that you accompany him as his personal medical liaison during the transport. We have a chopper waiting on the roof. I can't," Abby said, looking down at her scrubs. "I'm fired, remember?" "No," Henderson blurted out, stepping forward, his hands shaking. No, absolute misunderstanding, Miss Ross. Abby, you are most certainly not fired. We were just clarifying. You are a valued member of this team." Abby looked at Henderson. Then she looked at Sterling, who was staring at the floor, his career flashing before his eyes. "I think," Abby said slowly, that I resign." "Excellent choice," the general said. "We have better work for you, Abby." "Wait," Sterling whispered. "You can't just take her. She broke protocol." The general paused at the door. He looked back at Sterling one last time. "Son, in the United States Army, we have a saying. Protocol is for peacetime. When the bullets fly, you follow the warrior. You should pray you never have to learn the difference." The general gestured for Abby to precede him. As they walked out of the boardroom, the soldiers snapped to attention. They walked down the hallway, past the gaping nurses, past a stunned Jessica and Chloe. Abby didn't look at them. She walked with her head high, the general at her side. But the story wasn't over. Because as they reached the roof, and the wind from the Black Hawk helicopter whipped Abby's hair, the general leaned in close. "Abby, there's something else," he shouted over the rotors. "Graves didn't just ask for you because you saved him. He has intel. He was coming to this city to find you specifically before he collapsed. He has information about what really happened in Kandahar 10 years ago. The mission where you got hurt, it wasn't an accident. And the people who set you up, they're still out there." Abby froze, her hand on the helicopter door. The past she had run from hadn't just found her. It had been hunting her. The flight to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center was a blur of rotor noise and silent tension. Abby sat opposite General Clayton, her hands folded in her lap, watching the landscape shift from the grey sprawl of the city to the green, manicured grounds of the capital's most secure medical facility. She wasn't thinking about Dr. Sterling or the humiliation of the boardroom anymore. She was thinking about Kandahar. 10 years ago, her unit had been hit by an airstrike. It was logged as a tragic error. Bad coordinates called in during a firefight. She had lost 6 men. She had lost the ability to run, and she had lost her faith in the command structure. She had taken her discharge and disappeared because she couldn't look at a uniform without seeing the faces of the boys who didn't come home. Now, Clayton was telling her it was a lie. When they landed, the medical transfer was executed with military precision. Colonel Graves was rushed to the VIP wing on the top floor, a floor that didn't exist on public elevator directories. Security was tight, MPs at every door, Idaho checks that involved biometric scans. Abby was given a set of fresh scrubs, navy blue, with no hospital logo, and allowed into the colonel's room once he was stabilized. Richard Iron Graves looked older than she remembered. The oxygen tube taped to his face and the IV line snaking into his arms made him look vulnerable, a stark contrast to the indomitable leader she had served under. But his eyes were open, and they were sharp. "Major," he rasped as she entered. "It's just Abby now, sir," she said, checking his monitor out of habit. "Heart rate is stabilizing. You gave us a scare." "I have a habit of doing that." Graves tried to smile, but it turned into a grimace. He gestured for the general to leave the room. Clayton hesitated, then nodded and stepped out, closing the door. "Abby," Graves said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen to me closely. We don't have much time. You're safe here, Colonel. You're at Walter Reed." "Nowhere is safe," Graves said, gripping her wrist. His hand was weak, but his desperation was strong. 3 months ago, I was appointed to the Oversight Committee for Defense Spending. Boring desk job, or so I thought. I started digging into old files, archives from the Afghan Reconstruction period. He coughed, wincing in pain. Abby reached for the water, but he stopped her. "I found the flight logs, Abby. The airstrike that hit your unit in the Arghandab Valley. It wasn't a mistake. The pilot didn't enter the wrong coordinates. He was given those coordinates by a private contractor on the ground." Abby felt the blood drain from her face. "That's impossible. We were the only friendlies in the sector. Why would a contractor call a strike on a US medical unit?" "Because you were in the way," Graves hissed. "Your unit had set up camp near a village called Shah Wali Kot. What you didn't know was that a private military company, Vanguard Solutions, was using that village as a hub to smuggle heroin and gold out of the country. They were using military transport lanes to move contraband, Abby's mind flashed back. The village, the trucks she had seen leaving in the middle of the night. She had reported it, thinking it was local insurgents. "I reported the trucks," she whispered. "Exactly," Graves said, and that report got flagged. Not by intelligence, but by the mole Vanguard had inside the Pentagon. They decided to wipe the slate clean. They called in a broken arrow strike on your position to bury the evidence and silence the witness. They killed 6 of your men to protect a heroin shipment. Tears pricked Abby's eyes, hot and angry. Who did this? The man who ran Vanguard Solutions back then is now a politician, Graves said. Senator Julian Thorne. He's the front runner for the Defense Appropriations Committee. If he gets that seat, he buries the evidence forever. I made a copy of the digital ledger. I have proof of the order, the money trail, everything. "Where is it?" Abby asked. "It's not on me," Graves said. "I knew they were watching me. That's why I collapsed. It wasn't just my heart. I think my coffee was dosed at the gala. They tried to induce a heart attack to make it look natural." Abby's nurse instincts kicked in. She looked at the IV bag hanging beside the bed. She looked at the chart. "If they tried to kill you and failed," Abby said slowly, "they won't stop. They know you're here." "I hid the drive," Graves said, "in the one place no one would look, but I need you to get it. I can't walk." "Where is it, Richard?" "My old locker." He smiled weakly. "At the VFW hall in Baltimore, the one we used to drink at. Lock 42. Combination is your birthday." Abby stared at him. He had kept a locker for 10 years, with her birthday as the code? "You need to go," Graves said. "Take the general. Go get the drive. Bring it to the press. Burn them down, Abby. For your boys." Before Abby could answer, the door opened. But it wasn't General Clayton. It was a doctor, young, wearing a surgical mask and a white coat. He was pushing a medication cart. "Time for his beta blocker," the doctor mumbled, keeping his head down. Abby frowned. She knew the schedule. He had his meds an hour ago. "Who ordered this?" The doctor didn't answer. He reached into his pocket, not for a syringe, but for something metallic. Abby saw the glint of the silencer before she saw the gun. Reaction time is a strange thing. In the civilian world, it degrades, but trauma writes pathways into the brain that never truly fade. When the doctor pulled the pistol, Abby didn't think. She didn't scream. She moved. She grabbed the heavy metal IV pole standing next to the bed and swung it like a baseball bat. The assassin had expected a terrified old woman. He hadn't expected a combat veteran. The heavy base of the IV pole connected with his wrist with a sickening crunch. The gun discharged, the bullet shattering the window glass, but the weapon flew out of his hand and skittered across the linoleum. "Security!" Abby roared, not in a panic, but with a command voice that shook the walls. The assassin, clutching his broken wrist, lunged at the colonel with a knife he pulled from his belt with his left hand. He was a professional. Pain was secondary to the mission. Abby threw herself across the colonel's body. She took the blade in her upper arm. It sliced through the scrub top and bit deep into the deltoid muscle. She grunted but didn't let go. She jammed her thumb into the assassin's eye socket, driving it deep. He howled, rearing back. The door burst open. General Clayton and 2 MPs stormed in. "Drop it!" the MPs screamed. The assassin realized the gig was up. He turned toward the window, 7 stories up, and didn't hesitate. He smashed the remaining glass with his shoulder and dove out. Abby scrambled to the window, clutching her bleeding arm. She saw a rope descending from the roof. He had a rappel line set up. He slid down, disappearing into the darkness of the parking lot below. "Secure the perimeter," Clayton yelled into his radio. "We have a hostile on the grounds. Lock down. I want this hospital sealed tight." He turned to Abby. "You're hit." "I'm fine," Abby said, grabbing a towel to compress her wound. "He was here for Graves. They know." "Who knows?" Clayton demanded. "Senator Thorne," Abby said. "Vanguard Solutions." Clayton's face went ashen. Thorn. He's in the building. He's visiting the Wounded Warrior Wing downstairs for a photo op. He's not here for a photo op, Abby realized, a cold chill running down her spine. He's here to make sure the job is done. Suddenly the hospital's PA system chimed. Code red, fire in the East Wing. Evacuate immediately. Code red. It's a distraction, Abby said. They're going to flush us out. If we move the colonel to the transport elevators, we're sitting ducks. The lights in the room flickered and died. The emergency red backup lights bathed the room in a bloody glow. The electronic lock on the door disengaged with a click. They cut the power, Clayton said, drawing his sidearm. My comms are jammed. I can't reach my detail. We can't stay here, Graves gasped from the bed. They'll come room by room. Abby looked at the general, then at the colonel. She looked at her bleeding arm. The pain was sharp, grounding her. General, how many rounds do you have? Abby asked. 15, Clayton said, +1 in the chamber. We need to get to the basement, Abby said. The old maintenance tunnels connect to the naval annex. It's the only way out without being seen. That's a mile walk, Clayton said, and Richard can't walk. Abby looked around the room. She spotted a laundry cart, a canvas bin on wheels. He doesn't have to walk, Abby said. She stripped the sheets off the bed. Help me wrap him. We need to move. Now. They bundled the colonel into the cart, covering him with dirty linens to hide him. It was undignified for a war hero, but dignity doesn't stop bullets. Abby took the handle. General, you take point. I'll push. Your arm, Abby, Clayton warned. It's my left arm, she gritted out. I push with my legs. They moved into the hallway. The corridor was chaos. Nurses were running, alarms were blaring, and smoke was starting to drift from the ventilation ducts. Keep your head down, Abby whispered to the colonel in the cart. They reached the service elevator. It was dead because of the power outage. Stairs, Abby said. It's 7 flights, Clayton noted. Then we better start stepping. They began the descent. It was grueling. Abby, with her bad leg and bleeding arm, had to lower the heavy cart down each step, counting on the general to hold the weight from the front. Every step sent a jolt of fire through her hip. Sweat stung her eyes. On the 4th floor landing, the door swung open. 2 men in tactical gear wearing gas masks stepped onto the landing. They weren't MPs. They held suppressed submachine guns. Clayton didn't hesitate. Pop, pop. 2 shots. 1 man went down. The other sprayed bullets into the stairwell. Abby shoved the cart hard against the concrete wall, shielding Graves. Ideally, she would have taken cover, but the cart was exposed. Go! Clayton yelled, firing suppressive shots. Get him down! I'm not leaving you, Abby shouted. That is a direct order, Major, Clayton roared, turning to fire again. Get the evidence. Get the colonel safe. Abby looked at her old friend. She knew that look. It was the look of a man who was buying time with his life. Go! Clayton screamed as bullets sparked off the railing near his head. Abby grabbed the cart. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the sweat and soot. She pushed. She practically threw the cart down the remaining stairs, sliding down the railing herself to catch it at the turn. She heard gunfire from above. Then a shout. Then silence. She didn't stop. She couldn't. She reached the basement level. The maintenance tunnels were dark, smelling of damp earth and oil. She pushed the cart, her limp becoming a drag, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She pushed until her muscles failed, until she was deep in the tunnel system under the Capitol. She found a maintenance alcove and collapsed against the wall, sliding down to the floor. Abby? The colonel's voice was muffled from the cart. We're clear, she wheezed. For now. She checked her arm. The bleeding had slowed, but she was lightheaded. She checked the colonel. He was shaken, but alive. Marcus? Graves asked. Abby didn't answer. She just closed her eyes for a second. They were alone. No general. No backup. Just a crippled nurse and a dying colonel, hunted by a senator with a private army. We have to get to Baltimore, Abby whispered, opening her eyes. The steel was back in her gaze. We have to get that drive. How? Graves asked. We have no car, no money, and every cop in DC will be looking for us as suspects in the fire." Abby reached into her pocket. She pulled out the wallet she had taken off the assassin she blinded. "We have a car," she said, holding up a key fob she found inside. "His." She stood up, ignoring the screaming pain in her leg. "They wanted a war," Abby said, gripping the handle of the laundry cart. "Let's give them one." The drive to Baltimore was a nightmare of adrenaline and pain. Abby drove the assassin's black sedan with one hand, her left arm throbbing in a makeshift tourniquet. Beside her, Colonel Graves drifted in and out of consciousness, clutching the dashboard. They pulled up to the VFW post 104, a brick building with a peeling sign and a gravel lot full of pickup trucks. It was Friday night. The parking lot was full. "We're here," Abby said, shaking Graves' shoulder. "Richard, wake up. We're here." They stumbled out of the car. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour. Abby practically carried the colonel to the door, kicking it open. The noise inside was deafening. Classic rock playing from a jukebox, the clatter of pool balls and the roar of laughter. The room was filled with men and women in vests, caps, and denim. The air smelled of cheap beer and old tobacco. The room went silent as they entered. They were a sight. A woman in bloody scrubs and a man in a hospital gown, wrapped in a dirty sheet, both soaked to the bone. "Help him!" Abby shouted, her voice cracking. 3 men at the bar stood up instantly. They didn't ask questions. They saw the look in Abby's eyes, the look of a soldier in the shit, and they moved. They grabbed the colonel and lowered him onto a booth seat. "I need locker 42, Abby gasped, leaning against the pool table. "Where are the lockers?" "Back hallway," the bartender, a burly man with a thick beard, pointed. "You okay, darling?" "Call the police," Abby said, "and the FBI. Tell them an officer is down." She ran to the back hallway. She found locker 42. Her fingers shook as she spun the dial. Right to 10, left to 24, right to 65. Click! The door swung open. Inside, taped to the back wall, was a silver USB drive. She grabbed it. She had it. The proof. But before she could turn around, the front windows of the VFW hall shattered inward. Glass flew everywhere. The patrons dove for cover. "Nobody move!" A voice amplified by a megaphone boomed from the parking lot. "This building is surrounded. Send out Colonel Graves and the woman, and no one else gets hurt." Abby ran back to the main room. Through the broken windows, she saw the headlights of a dozen SUVs. Men in tactical gear were taking positions behind car doors, rifles trained on the entrance. Senator Julian Thorne stepped out of the lead vehicle. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a tactical vest over a dress shirt. He looked like a man who had decided to clean up his own mess. "You have 3 minutes, Thorne yelled. Inside, the mood had shifted from confusion to anger. These weren't just bar patrons. These were veterans. Vietnam, Panama, Desert Storm, Iraq. "Who the hell is that?" the bartender asked, racking a shotgun he had pulled from under the counter. "That," Abby said, holding up the drive, "is the man who sold out American soldiers for heroin money. And he's here to kill the only witnesses." She looked at the room. She saw the caps. 1st Marine Division, 101st Airborne. Big red one. "I am Major Abigail Ross," Abby said, her voice steady despite the pain. "This is Colonel Richard Graves. We are under fire. We are outnumbered. But I will be damned if I surrender this drive to that traitor." An old man at the end of the bar, wearing a hearing aid and a Vietnam veteran hat, slowly stood up. He picked up his cane. Then he picked up a pool cue. "He wants to come in here?" the old man spat. "Let him try." "We got you, Major," a younger guy with a prosthetic leg said, standing up from a table. "Lock the back door. Barricade the front." Outside, Thorne checked his watch. "Time's up. Breach the door." 5 mercenaries rushed the entrance. They expected a terrified nurse and a dying old man. What they got was a wall of pool cues, bar stools, and the fury of 50 men who had been looking for a fight since they came home. The first mercenary was leveled by the bartender's shotgun blast to the ceiling, a warning shot that sent plaster raining down. The second was tackled by the guy with the prosthetic leg. The brawl spilled out into the parking lot. It was chaos. Thorne's men were trained killers, but they were hesitant to open fire on a crowd of civilians, especially in a city center. They tried to use batons and tasers, but the vets fought back with a ferocity that defied their age. Abby didn't hide. She saw Thorne standing by his car, furious, pulling his own pistol. He was aiming at the colonel, who was being shielded by 2 women near the window. Abby ran. She burst through the front door, ignoring the melee. She sprinted, limp and all, straight at the senator. Thorne saw her coming. He raised his gun. "You stupid Bang! Thorne's gun fired, the bullet tearing through the shoulder of Abby's scrub top. She didn't stop. She collided with him, driving her shoulder into his chest. They both went down onto the wet gravel. The gun skittered away. Thorne was younger and stronger, but Abby was fighting for something more than survival. She was fighting for her boys. He punched her in the face. She tasted blood. He reached for her throat. Suddenly, a red laser dot appeared on Thorne's forehead, then another on his chest, then a dozen more. "Federal agents, drop it!" Floodlights blinded them. 2 FBI helicopters roared overhead, descending fast. Armored trucks smashed through the perimeter of Thorne's SUVs. Thorne froze. Abby, panting, blood dripping from her nose, looked up. Walking through the police line, flanked by FBI agents, was a man with his arm in a sling, looking battered, but very much alive. General Clayton. "Get off her," Clayton ordered. Thorne slowly raised his hands. "General, this is a misunderstanding. I was conducting a citizen's arrest." "Save it for the court-martial, Senator," Clayton said. "I sent the audio from the hospital stairs to the bureau before my comms went dead. They heard you order the hit. It's over." Agents swarmed Thorne, cuffing him and dragging him away. Abby rolled onto her back, the rain washing the blood from her face. She looked up at the stormy sky. Clayton knelt beside her. "I told you, Abby, we don't leave our people behind." "You're late," Abby whispered, smiling through cracked lips. "Traffic was a bitch," Clayton grinned. Inside the VFW, a cheer went up. The bartender came out with 2 cold beers. He handed one to the general and tried to hand one to Abby, but the paramedics were already swarming her. The St. Jude's emergency room was busy. Dr. Caleb Sterling was no longer there. He was currently facing an inquiry by the medical board and working at an urgent care clinic in a strip mall 3 towns over. Abby Ross walked through the double doors. She wasn't wearing scrubs. She was wearing a dress uniform, Major's oak leaves shining on her shoulders. She walked with a cane now, a sleek black one, but she didn't hide it. She stopped at the nursing station. Jessica and Chloe froze. "Can I help you, Mom?" Jessica asked, terrified. "I'm just here to drop off some paperwork," Abby said, placing a file on the counter. "My reinstatement forms. I'll be taking over as the new trauma coordinator starting Monday." Jessica's jaw dropped. "But you're a major. You're famous. You were on the news. Why would you come back here? You could go anywhere." Abby looked around the ER. She saw the chaos. She saw the pain. She saw a young nurse struggling to start an IV on a crying child. Abby walked over, gently took the needle from the young nurse's hand, and with one smooth motion, found the vein. The child stopped crying. She turned back to Jessica. "Because the war is over," Abby said. "But the fight to save lives never ends. And besides," Abby smiled, a real, genuine smile, "someone has to teach you people how to do it right." She turned and walked down the hall, the cane tapping a steady rhythm on the floorboard, the heartbeat of the hospital, strong and unbroken. And that is the story of Major Abigail Ross, the woman they called the Quiet Nurse. It reminds us that true heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear faded scrubs and walk with a limp. The people we underestimate often hold the most incredible stories of sacrifice and courage. Doctor. Sterling learned the hard way that you should never judge a book by its cover, especially when that book has a distinguished service cross tucked inside the pages. What do you think? Would you have stood your ground like Abby, or would you have signed the paper? Let me know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story of justice, karma, and real-life heroes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.